Testimony from Wesley Norris, and Wesley Norris is a former slave of his father-in-law, Custis, who Lee then inherited, right? So the slave wrote this narrative in 1866, or it was recorded in 1866. Let's see what he has to say. My name is Wesley Norris. I was born a slave on the plantation of George Parke Custis. After the death of Mr. Custis, General Lee, who had been made executor of the estate, assumed control of the slaves, in number about 70. So there's about 70 slaves that he inherited. It was the general impression among the slaves of Mr. Custis that on his death they should be forever free. In fact, this statement had been made to them by Mr. C. years before. At his death, we were informed by General Lee that the conditions of the will, we must remain slaves for 5 years. Okay, so what he's saying is Norris says Custis wanted them free, them meaning the slaves, freed immediately after his death. And that Lee said, nope, you're going to remain slaves for 5 years. I remained with General Lee for about 17 months when my sister Mary, a cousin of ours, and I determined to run away, which we did in the year 1859. We had already reached Westminster in Maryland on our way to the north when we were apprehended and thrown into prison, and General Lee notified of our arrest. We remained in prison for 15 days when we were sent back to Arlington. So, Norris and 2 family members try to escape, but are caught. And they wind up in prison for 15 days. Okay, and then they're sent back to Arlington, and Arlington House is Robert E. Lee's main home. We were immediately taken before General Lee, who demanded the reason why we ran away. We frankly told him that we considered ourselves free. He then told us he would teach us a lesson we would never forget. He then ordered us to the barn, where in his presence we were tied firmly to posts by a Mr. Gwynn, our overseer, who was ordered by General Lee to strip us to the waist and give us 50 lashes each, excepting my sister, who received but 20. We were accordingly stripped to the skin by the overseer, who, however, had sufficient humanity to decline whipping us. So, Lee says he'll teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Okay? Has them tied up and orders 50 lashes, except for the 20 for the sister. And this is the interesting thing. The overseer won't do it. I wonder why. Don't know. Accordingly, Dick Williams, a county constable, was called in. So a constable's like a police officer, okay? So a county policeman was called in, who gave us the number of lashes ordered. General Lee, in the meantime, stood by. So General Lee stood by watching, and frequently enjoined Williams to lay it on well. So Lee is saying he's enjoining Williams, he's encouraging Williams to really give it to him, right? Really give him some lashes. An injunction which he did not fail to heed. Not satisfied with simply lacerating our naked flesh, General Lee then ordered the overseer to thoroughly wash our backs with brine, which was done. Now, guys, if you've ever heard putting salt in a wound, you know that expression, and making it worse? That's basically what brine is. So salt in the wounds. Now, that would have to be incredibly painful, and that is what Lee orders after he's not satisfied with the whipping of these slaves. And then it goes on to a few other things, all right, about how he changes how he gets out of there and everything eventually. But let's read this last part. What I have stated is true in every particular, and I can at any time bring at least a dozen witnesses, both white and black, to substantiate my statements. So he's saying he has witnesses, black and white, which if that's pretty significant, right? Black and white to say this is true. So to help him prove it, right? He's got a lot of witnesses to call upon. All right, guys, so it's your job to decide. Was Robert E. Lee, was he pro-slavery? Was he anti-slavery? Is he deserving of these monuments or not? This is up to you to decide based